This episode, has Linux gone mainstream? Novell expands Linux Cloud to Amazon, and Google updates Chrome. QuickSurf Internet Media presents Linux News Log, separating the Linux and open source signal from the noise. Hey everybody, how's it going? I'm your host Adrian, coming to you almost live from lovely Phoenix, Arizona, here in Studio C1. Linux News Log is a proud member of the Tech Podcast Network. If it's tech, it's here. Do feel free to head on over to techpodcast.com and check out all the other technology-related shows over there. Let's go ahead and get into the stories for Season 11, Episode 3. From serverwatch.com, there's a story here. Novell expands cloud computing Linux to Amazon. Novell's SUSE Linux Enterprise Server is now available on Amazon's cloud as a pay-per-use operating system. The move follows similar efforts from rivals Red Hat and Ubuntu, though Novell executives stressed that their approach is different. The Amazon EC2 SLES service is part of Novell's cloud program to help enable cloud providers to deliver Novell's Linux. So it's, one of those things where they're trying to expand their market reach. And, if you happen to be an SLES user and you want to do cloud stuff, bada bing, bada bang, there you go. Let's talk about our sponsor for this episode, GoToAssist Express. There are a variety of tools that let you remotely support a client, colleague, or friend, but the only one I trust and rely on is GoToAssist Express. It's the best remote support tool designed for small to medium-sized businesses, and it's brought to you by Citrix. Why GoToAssist Express? It has exceptional performance, it's very easy to use, and it's secure. IT professionals, really anybody who doesn't have time to squander with a tool that's slow or unreliable, will appreciate GoToAssist Express. With GoToAssist Express, there's no IT maintenance or updating. It's so fast you'll be on a client's computer, troubleshooting in seconds. It's also consistently reliable. My audience can try GoToAssist Express free for 30 days. For this special offer, visit gotoassist.com/techpodcast. I repeat, my audience can try GoToAssist Express free for 30 days. For this special offer, visit gotoassist.com/techpodcast. From Internet News, there's a story here, has Linux gone mainstream? It starts off, Linux is now in the mainstream of enterprise adoption, according to analysts presenting new research here at the LinuxCon conference. Separate data sets from both IDC and Forrester Research presented at the conference show that Linux and other open source technologies continue to make inroads in corporate settings. So you can read the whole story looking at everything, but I partially agree, but at the same time, I don't really agree with their definition of mainstream. I guess it really depends. Mainstream in what sense? Mainstream as in you have a lot of desktop users? No, Linux is not mainstream and won't be for a long time. Mainstream as in it's being used in a lot of places? Well, yes, but there's a lot of other software that's also being used in a lot of places. So the term mainstream to me is very subjective, and in the enterprise field, Linux has always been strong, especially in internet-related businesses, because you've got, well, not necessarily Linux itself, but open source software is more mainstream than Linux itself, because you've got Apache web server. You've got a lot of open source tools out there that aren't necessarily Linux related, but they are open source, and those open source as a whole, I think, has gone mainstream. But Linux itself, maybe in a few areas, a few niches, it's gone mainstream. But then it really asks the bigger question: what exactly is mainstream? Because if it's only gone mainstream in the enterprise storage space, or that's a pretty small market. If it's gone mainstream as in, Dell and HP and every computer manufacturer, almost every computer manufacturer on the planet, gives you an option to install Linux, and a significant portion of desktop machines out there are Linux, enough so that when you go to buy software, you get it in multiple versions. That's mainstream. That's just how it is. to me, that's what mainstream means. Saying, oh, we're mainstream because we're using it in a lot of enterprise systems. Well, yes, but enterprise systems is a really small market compared to the much larger technology computing landscape. So we'll see. From PC World, there's a story here: Linux compliance program in response to surging open source use. This is pretty neat. The Open Compliance Program announced by the Linux Foundation is a response to the surging growth in the use of open source technologies within enterprises and by makers of consumer electronics and mobile devices, analysts say. Much of the program appears to be directed at addressing what many analysts said is a continuing confusion among makers of embedded devices about open source licensing requirements. But enterprises can benefit from the program as well. So, I totally agree with this. There's a lot of confusion. I can't tell you how many jobs I've worked at where, we're coding up some project or whatever, and this guy's like, hey, there's this library that'll make our life easier. We can just use it, and it's open source. And you're like, and we're not releasing our program, as open source. And, it's like, oh, no, we can't use that. Because if, it gets, real hairy depending on, what license it's licensed under. There's a lot of open source licenses out there. And, to various degrees, if you go and use open source code in your project, you are not supposed to, release it as anything other than open source. So, it becomes real hairy, and a lot of people don't really understand that. They think open source is free, and that's not the case. You may be able to get it for free, but that's only under those license terms. So, be interesting to see how much traction this particular compliance program gains over time, but if you ask me, it's a good start. From the Inquirer, Google has updated Chrome versions 5 and 6. It's updated for security and Flash support in its current version, while the beta for version 6 has been given better data protection. Google has said that Chrome 5 update for Windows, Linux, and Mac OS X adds new components for Flash. The U.S. Computer Emergency Response Team reports that the update also includes fixes for remote code execution vulnerabilities. So very nice. All welcome changes. Good on Google. From CNET's Crave Gadget blog, there's a look here entitled Early Take on India's $35 Tablet, and they say it's fairly impressive. Remember that $35 tablet out of India we told you about last month? Well, if you want to see the much talked about prototype in moving color, a gadget show on Indian television just featured an exclusive hands-on that could help dissipate some of the skepticism about the device. So, a lot of people are skeptical. I myself, usually if you're down in the $35 range, it's going to look like dookie, or it's going to be cheap and break easy, or there's going to be some aspect of it that is subpar. And so I'm personally very happy to see, bam, fairly impressive. Now, CNET is a pretty well-respected website with good reviews of stuff. So I'm real happy to see that. Now, once it actually becomes a little more widespread and available, and we start to see more, a little bit closer look at it, that's when the real metal's gonna meet the road. But for the moment, it's looking pretty promising. They actually have a screenshot here up on the website. If you want to see it, go to my website at quicksurf or linux.quicksurf.com and take a look at it. From MarketWatch at marketwatch.com, that Monta Vista Software launches Meld 2.0 next generation community for developers of embedded Linux devices. This is pretty neat. Monta Vista Software, a leader in embedded Linux commercialization today, announced the launch of Meld 2.0, the next generation of the embedded Linux community sponsored by Monta Vista. Meld is an active community for all developers of embedded Linux devices. The next generation Meld introduces a new look and feel to the community along with a new URL, meld.org, and that's MELD.org, making it easier for users to connect and share information on embedded Linux design challenges. So kind of nice. It was launched in March of 2009. The 2.0, that was the 1.0 version. The 2.0 version is new, obviously. They got a new URL and all that good stuff. So pretty good stuff. I'll be keeping an eye on it to see how it works out. And, check it out. That'll pretty much do it for this edition of Linux News Log. As always, I thank you for watching and listening. For those of you who are on YouTube and blip.tv and all the other stuff, everything I've talked about is linked. Well, anybody who's watching or listening, everything I've talked about is linked up in the show notes over at linux.quicksurf.com. And it was kind of a slow news week this week, so I couldn't get nearly as many stories as I wanted to, but still, nonetheless, all good stuff. So with that, I'll see you on the next episode. See you then. Bye.